Hello and welcome to the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, registered dietitian, running coach, marathon runner, and mom. This season, we're breaking down running's biggest trends, hot topics, and myths, and turning them into practical nutrition and training advice you can actually use every day. Let's get into it. Hey there. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to just take a minute to invite you to a free webinar that I'm hosting on Wednesday, May the 6th. It's my Fuel Smarter, Run Stronger webinar. If you are stuck in a running rut, if you are constantly battling food cravings, if you just cannot seem to get any changes on the scale or with your body composition, and you're tired of bonking on your long runs and raiding the kitchen every night like a hungry trash panda, then I really want you to save a spot and join me live for this workshop. In it, I'm going to share with you why most of the nutrition advice that you hear online is just wrong when it comes to runners, and honestly, why a lot of the nutrition advice that you hear from family, friends, or maybe even your doctor is not great advice if you're a runner. And I'll also be sharing with you the key strategies that you need to really level up your running performance, have better quality workouts, start getting closer to your PR goals, and most of all, stop constantly battling cravings and feel like food is just so complicated, so confusing, and so overwhelming. So once again, this is my Fuel Smarter, Run Stronger webinar. It's on May the 6th, and you can save your spot for this event at the link in the show notes. All right, hope to see you there. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I am trying this for the second time this morning. Fortunately, I only got about 10 seconds into the episode before I realized that my microphone was not turned on, which would have meant I would have had no recording. So fortunately, it did not take me very long to figure it out. I did do that once before where I recorded an entire episode and did not have my microphone turned on. So we have done all of our pre-flight checks and we're good to go here. So today I'm excited to bring you this episode all about carb Q&A. So I am sharing some questions I've got recently about carbs and some very common questions I've gotten around carbohydrates, and just sharing my thoughts on some of these topics that can be a little bit kind of tough, a little bit nuanced. You know, there's sort of a lot to unpack sometimes when we're talking about carbohydrates. And I think that that's why it's still so easy in today's day and age for us to get very confused around carbohydrates and for there to still be so much information out there about carbohydrates. So we're going to dive in. I've got 3 questions that I'm answering today. And if you have more questions on carbs, then please feel free to share them with me over on Instagram. You can find me at Steph the Runner's Dietitian, and we can do a follow-up episode. We can do a part 2 for carb Q&A. So the first one was a question that I had gotten from somebody via Instagram message. And this one, of course, comes up a lot in what are my thoughts on cereal? So like breakfast cereal. What are my thoughts on breakfast cereal? And honestly, like, for runners, I mean, sort of in general, but like for runners, I think that breakfast cereal can be like a really fantastic choice, a really fantastic carb option. And I know that, like, yes, breakfast cereal is very processed. Breakfast cereal is very high in sugar, right? Lots of breakfast cereals are very, very high in added sugars. It's something that is sort of a debated food in the breakfast aisle, you know, like, oh, dietitians recommending you eat cereal for breakfast, and, you know, all the back and forth about cereal and whether or not we should be having it. But I want to explain why I think that for runners, it can be such a fantastic carb option. So yes, breakfast cereal as a whole is a convenient source of quick digesting carbohydrates. And there are times in our day as runners when that's exactly what we want and that's exactly what we need. So do I think that, like, you should have a bowl of Fruit Loops every single day for breakfast, whether or not you are running on that day? No, of course not, right? Like, breakfast cereal, especially those higher sugar breakfast cereals, on their own are not going to give you the balance of nutrients that you need, that I would consider to be a healthy meal, right? A healthy, balanced meal has more to it than just quick digesting carbohydrates and a lot of added sugars. So no, I don't think that breakfast cereal is an ideal sort of standalone meal, but there aren't very many single foods that I think are, right? Because what makes a meal is the balance and the variety of nutrients on our plate. But I do think that there are fantastic times and places to incorporate breakfast cereal into our diet as runners. And like I said, because it's a source of quick digesting carbs, I think an ideal time to include breakfast cereal in your nutrition plan is as a pre-run, pre-workout snack option. It's great because it's convenient and versatile, tons of different options, different kinds, different amounts of sugar, right? Like some are actually pretty low in added sugars. They still have lots of carbohydrates, right, from the starches, like say plain Cheerios, as opposed to Fruit Loops. But before you run, like you want the fast digesting carbs, right? So like whichever one you choose, if you're having Cheerios or Fruit Loops, like it's up to you. What do you want to eat? Because they both are going to give you a good amount, a good source of those rapid digesting carbohydrates. You just have to eat a bigger bowl of the Cheerios in order to like have the exact same amount, kind of gram for gram, right? So you want those fast digesting carbs. The other reason that I like it is because it's fairly portable. Now, I have a confession to make. I do not put milk on my cereal. I know. Pausing for reactions. Some people have a very strong reaction to me sharing that I don't put milk in my cereal. But one of the reasons that I have like often eaten cereal without milk, I'm not like super opposed to it. I like milk. I use milk in other parts of my life. But part of the reason why I don't is because I like to be able to have it sort of on the go. So if I'm like away from home, if I was, at work when I used to like work at an office, go work away from home, and I'd be like going to the gym after work, like having a container of cereal was fantastic, just like be able to snack on in the afternoon before I go to the gym or that kind of thing, right? So I've just gotten used to not having cereal with milk. I also don't like soggy cereal, so that's another reason, but I digress. So it's portable, and almost no matter where in the world you find yourself traveling, not that I have traveled the world extensively to that point, but like if you're traveling to most places, you're going to find some sort of breakfast cereal option, right? Now, if you're traveling, say, like within North America, where of course, our food options are going to be fairly similar across the board, what I love is that if you're traveling somewhere, you can go into a convenience store, you can go into a grocery, like anywhere you go, there's going to be cereal on the aisle. So if you need like a quick, easy snack that you can eat in a hotel room with or without milk, I don't care, whatever you want to do, then you can have something. So I think that there's a lot of reasons why cereal is a really solid option for like a pre-workout snack or even like intra-run fuel, right? Like you can kind of snack on cereal as you're running if you wanted to. But no, I don't think that cereal in and of itself is like balanced enough or has enough variety of nutrients, enough protein, etc., in order for it to be a meal on its own. I think it could be part of a meal, paired up with some other things, but it's more to me of like a pre-run kind of snack. Or say something that you're having, again, maybe as part of a bigger snack in the evening before bed. If, again, we're trying to get in more carbohydrates for a long run the next morning as a carb loading option, right? A time and a place that it's a really convenient source of nutrients. The other reason that I like it as well, and this is kind of one last point, is if we're comparing it to other similar simple carbohydrate options, a lot of breakfast cereals have quite a bit more in terms of added nutrients. And this can be very beneficial for runners, especially because breakfast cereal can be a fabulous source of iron. So a lot of breakfast cereals are fortified with lots of different nutrients. B vitamins and iron especially is added to a lot of breakfast cereals. And so if you are someone who struggles to get in iron, something like swapping maybe a couple pieces of toast that you might be having in the morning for a pre-run snack, or maybe in the evening before bed, swapping that out for a serving or two of breakfast cereal can make a big difference in your overall iron intake for the day. So something else to keep in mind that it is a source, yes, of quick digesting carbohydrates, but can also be a really great source of nutrients. So my overall thoughts on cereal, great choice. Just like everything, there's a time and a place for it. But because it is high in sugar, don't let that make you afraid or stop you from incorporating it into your diet in some way, shape, or form if you want to. Okay, so that kind of brings us to our next question, which is this question actually came in from a recent podcast episode that I had done where I had mentioned like simple carbohydrates versus quality carbohydrates. And this individual was wanting a little bit more information on what I meant by that. So let's break it down. Simple carbs versus like quality carbs. Now, in that context, I was talking about like the types of carbs that I think of as a dietitian, the types of carbs that I think of as like carbs that you would have with a meal versus carbs that you would have specifically for like pre and intra run fuel. So there are lots of different ways of like categorizing carbohydrates, depending on your goal and depending on the context, right? No method is 100% perfect or accurately captures all of the nuance around carbohydrates and the different types and how rapidly digested they are and this, that, and the other thing. But the way that I think about carbohydrates and want my clients to think about carbohydrates is basically fast digesting carbohydrates and slow digesting carbohydrates. So, very generally speaking, your fastest digesting carbohydrates will be those simple carbs, right? So, you can think about like your gels, candy, sports drinks, fruit juice, right? Things that are predominantly sugar and added sugar, especially. Now, not fruit juice. Obviously, fruit juice is like it's natural sugar from the fruit, but there's no fiber. And so that's what makes it quicker to digest. Again, there's so much nuance around this and so much context that it is very hard to like pinpoint and like 100% put food in one box versus another because there's just so much going on. But these fast digesting carbs, the reason that they're fast digesting is because they're typically lower in fiber. So those and fiber slows down our digestion. So the carbohydrates, we eat them and they go from being eaten to entering our bloodstream very, very quickly, right? Most sport products and these sport foods, your gels, your sports drinks, all these different things, they are specifically formulated to do this, right? These sport scientists, these people who make these foods, they have specifically created types of sugars that enter our bloodstream as quickly as possible, right? And the reason that they do that is, of course, so we can get that energy as fast as possible when we're training, when we're racing, right? We don't want that sugar just sitting in our gut doing nothing. We want to get it to our working muscles as efficiently as possible so it can do its job of fueling our performances. The other problem is that when we have sugar sitting in our stomach for too long, this is where GI issues are most likely to occur. And so we want these things to go from being consumed to getting out of our GI system as efficiently as we can so that we are getting the energy and we're also not triggering some gut issues, right? So these types of fast digesting carbs are ideal for that immediate like pre-workout and during a workout time because they don't fill us up, right? They're not keeping us full and satisfied. They're just filling a need during that time, filling a need for quick energy, right? But no, they are not a great choice for like overall meeting our nutrition needs day to day because they have relatively little in them other than just the carbohydrates, right? And I don't like no one's going to argue about this point, right? Like we know that gels are not dinner. Like you're not going to have a gel for dinner or like eat some candy for lunch, right? There's a time and a place. Now, we have to be careful though, because I don't want people to be thinking, okay, fast digesting carbs equals bad carbs or junk food, or to think about these foods in a negative way. Because yes, they lack nutrition, right? They lack quality in the sense that they don't have protein, they don't have vitamins, they don't have those things, but they still fill a gap and there is still a time and a place for them. So don't be afraid to use those things and fuel with those things um, when you need to. But we just don't want those foods to be like making up the majority of our diet. Like we don't want to be having a lot of candy like outside of training. We don't want to be like drinking fruit juice all day long or sport. Like there's a time and a place for these things. Now, here's where it comes in to play the slow carbs, right? So this is what I like to think about as the carbs that make up our main meals and snacks throughout the day. So this, you can think about this as being like your steel cut oats, your pasta, your bread, beans, lentils, quinoa, fruit, potatoes, right? These foods have fiber. They have other nutrients in them. Some of them are also really great sources of protein. So, yes, they have carbs, but they also have nutrition. And that's what I mean when I say quality, is that it's not just the sugar that they're providing, but there's more to it that we need for optimal recovery, performance, right? Supporting our body in other ways. So these foods can be used before or during a workout. Like you can fuel before you train or during a training session with some of these foods, right? And a lot of people do. You can have potatoes, you can have fruit. Obviously, people will eat oatmeal before they go for a run, right? So it's not a matter of like, okay, you can't have these things because of the fiber, because of the nutrients. Obviously, too much can be an issue for some people for their digestion, but these are things that you can adapt to with training. The slower nature, though, of their digestion means that it can be harder to meet your needs and get that energy in quickly. So they may not be the most efficient way to fuel a workout. Doesn't make them bad. And I'm not to say that it will impair your workout, but the fiber can really fill us up. So if we were trying to say get in like 60 plus grams of carbs per hour, like the number of bananas you would have to eat per hour just might not make sense for you, right? Plus they're like bulky, like we're talking about bananas. Like, where are you going to put them all? Um, so they're kind of best suited for like your meals outside of your direct training. Now, a piece of fruit before a workout, I love that, right? But we're not talking about trying to eat a whole bunch of bananas, like a big pile of fruit, again, because that might not be the easiest thing for your gut. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, Steph, I eat a massive bowl of fruit every day before I train. I have no problems whatsoever. Fantastic. Like, do not change it if it's working for you. Some people just have an easier time tolerating the fiber than others. And a lot of it just comes down to what you're used to, right? And what you've kind of adapted to having. But these carbs, these slower carbs, are sort of best suited for our meals, right? They still provide a source of energy. Our muscles still store that glycogen for another time. We still want to include those. They're just providing us that fuel outside of the direct time we're training. So, really, the main takeaway from this conversation is that there's a time and a place for lots of different types of carbohydrate foods in our diet, right? There is no good carb or bad carb. There's fast carbs and there's slow carbs, and they are best suited to different times throughout the day. We're going to have more of them at certain times, less of them at other times. And again, it's not because they're bad for us. We just don't need them. Like, for example, when I'm in my off season, so, after I ran my marathon in the fall, I basically did like very little in terms of long runs until just a couple of weeks ago. Right now we're listening to this episode. We're into April already. So it hasn't been that many weeks since I've gone beyond running for 90 minutes. So during that time, like I don't need to be taking a lot of gels or using a lot of sports drinks, that kind of stuff when my workouts are shorter, right? My pre-workout meal and my post-workout meal is plenty to fuel a run that's going to be like just up to 90 minutes, especially if I'm only running maybe 4 days a week. Once I bump that up though to like basically doubling my mileage as I get ready for my next race, well, that kind of shifts things a little bit, right? Those long runs are getting longer. Now you start to incorporate some more intra-workout fuel. Maybe you're having a little bit more before other workouts because other workouts are longer as well. And again, it's not because those other sport products are bad. There's just a time and a place. So I can go months without having a sports drink or a gel and only just use and fuel all of my workouts just with those slower carbs that I'm eating at my regular meals and snacks. But as your mileage grows, that may need to shift, right? So on that note, the last question that I want to chat about today is carb loading and calculating our carb loading needs And oh my gosh, do I really need to get that much? So I see this question a lot and have had lots of enlightening conversations. Hopefully, people have found the conversations helpful. I calculated my carb loading target and it's XYZ grams per day. Do I really need that much? And how on earth am I supposed to get that much carbohydrate in a single day? So the question is, do I really need that much? Yes. Now, the one thing I will say though is make sure that you are calculating your carb loading target using your body weight in kilograms, not in pounds. Okay. So if you know your weight in pounds, divide that number by 2.2 to get the kilograms. And that's what you're using to calculate your carbohydrate requirements for carb loading. If you calculate it in pounds, you will get a gargantuan number that no, you don't need that much, right? You need your weight in kilograms, not in pounds. So typically your carb loading range is going to be anywhere from 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of your body weight per day. Now, to give you a little bit more context, like for people who are training moderately, right? Like your daily carbohydrate need might be around like 3 to 5 grams per kilo per day if you're like in an off season, kind of lower volume base building. If you're consistently training for like an hour a day, we might go to like 5 to 7 grams per kilo of your body weight per day. So still more than I think most people are getting. A lot of runners that I start working with are maybe hitting 3, but they're training like they need 7. And so there's this gap, right? This under fueling gap that we know is so common amongst runners and is why a lot of people struggle. And so then when it's like, okay, right now you're at 3, we got to get you to like 10. It's like, how am I going to get there? But if you're already used to being at like maybe 6 and we're bumping you up to 10, that's like, it's doable, right? It's doable. So it comes down to training and practice so that race week, you are not totally shocking your system in every single way and then having a crappy race and thinking it's because carb loading is crappy, right? So remember that carb loading is not forever. They may not be the healthiest days of eating that you've ever had, but this is why I don't like to think about good food and bad food, right? There's a time and a place and a rhyme and reason for everything. And a lot of runners are so uncomfortable with this idea of proper fueling because we're so afraid to eat more than we absolutely need just to survive. And this mindset around like minimalism with our nutrition is so detrimental to a lot of runners' performances. And a lot of runners are under fueling, not because they don't see the difference in their performance when they do fuel properly, but because there's so much pressure to minimize, to eat less, right? Sugar is poison, carbs are bad, avoid, limit, restrict, that it really messes with our head and our relationship with food and exercise. So that then when you've got like me, the sport dietitian, being like, okay, did you know you need to eat like 800 grams of carbs for your carb load? And I want you to be practicing that the day before your long run. Like, it's not just a matter of logistically, how do I get there? But it's like, how do I mentally be okay with eating that much when every other source of information is telling me that that is the worst possible thing that I can do for my weight or my health or like whatever it might be, right? So I want you to think about that. If that's the thing that comes up for you, is not that you don't appreciate or value the benefits to your performance, but the fear and the anxiety of, if I actually meet my carb loading target, what will happen to me as a result, or like what's the impact? That is something that I really want you to just be aware of and reflect on. And of course, that's something that I help runners with all the time, is slowly increasing that carb number and making those adjustments in a way that doesn't feel like such a huge shock and doesn't feel like such a massive shift all at once. So we don't want to start on race week carb loading for the very first time because it's probably going to go bad. This has to come with practice and gradually building up, especially, and the beautiful thing is if we can do this in conjunction with building up our volume, the day before our long run is the best time to practice this. So we start by assessing where you're at right now. How many grams a day of carbohydrates are you getting in right now for your current volume? Maybe, I don't know, 250. Okay, great. We're at 250. So next week, we're going to plan for 300. We're going to hit 300 grams of carbs for next week. Okay, great. depending on how much time you have here, like depending on how many weeks it is until your race and what your ultimate goal is for getting in all those carbs, maybe a week or two at 300. And then we're going to bump it up, right? And bump it up and bump it up little by little until we've got like, 2 or 3 really solid full carb loads under our belt. We're doing this the day before the long run. And then for race week, all we're doing is just extending that carb load for an extra day or two, right? Depending if you're doing a half, a full, or something longer. And so it's gradual, right? We're not just jumping in with 2 feet and like tripling or quadrupling your carbohydrate intake overnight. Cause yeah, it's going to feel like that's hard. Your gut's not going to love it. You're not going to love it. Logistically, it might be a little bit of a nightmare, but like adding in an extra 50 grams a day, that's doable, right? 50 grams a day is doable. 50 grams of extra carbs a day would be like, an extra serving of carbohydrate foods at breakfast, lunch, and supper. Like easy peasy, no problem, right? So the first thing we're going to do is, just like I said, adding a little bit more carbohydrates to our meals. The second thing, though, that we're going to start to focus on as that number continues to climb is adding in extra fluids that have carbohydrates. So drinking more of those carbs. And this is the point where people get really uncomfortable, is because we are told, don't drink your calories. Stop drinking the sugar-sweetened beverages. And yes, generally speaking, that is good advice, right? We should not be drinking a tremendous amount of sugar or calories all the time, right? When you're in an off season and you're not running for more than an hour, no, you don't need to be chugging fruit juice or pop all day long. But specifically when we're trying to maximize muscle glycogen, train our gut and train our system to have those extra carbohydrates on board, have a really good quality long run, there's a time and a place for adding in these things. And if we don't do that, if we don't take advantage of this, we're just going to continue to struggle on race day and continue to have problems tolerating carbohydrates, lackluster performances, disappointment with race day. But if we can be okay with adding in this extra source of fuel and making peace with, yes, it's not generally considered healthy, but it's all right in this context, it can make such a huge difference. Again, we want to keep fat and fiber low to avoid being too full. So this is why we're going to reach a point where adding in those liquid calories is really key. So that's kind of like the step-by-step of how we build up to reaching that carb loading number. And really, so much of it is like the practice and the logistics, but also the mindset shift and just getting really comfortable with actually doing it and putting it into practice. And I promise you, the first time or two around, you might be like, what am I doing? But after a couple of go-arounds, you're gonna have a really good plan, a really good system, and you're gonna be amazed at what it can do for your race day performances. If you are looking for more help with things like carb loading, planning out your race week nutrition, figuring out how to fuel for your different seasons and how the volume changes throughout the year, this is exactly what I've built inside my Fueled Runner program. So this is a new nutrition program that I launched just last month for runners. And it specifically has things like sample carb loading plans. So what to eat at what times of day, what portion sizes you need to hit different carb load targets. You don't need to figure that out for yourself. I have already done the work for you, along with tons of other educational resources, sample meal plans, recipe collections, and of course, support from me when you need it. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to learn more about the Fueled Runner program or all of my other programs and resources, then you can find everything you need to let me help you with your nutrition this season at the link in the show notes. All right, that's it for this week's episode. We will see you back here next week. Bye for now. On this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.